This is this is for Khunderay, and I saw that you um, there are no words. Okay, maybe this is where I can share something that I was experiencing last night. Because you know how it is when you get into the language of DNA or the language of frequency and vibration, what an encryption code is, what a decryption code is, how an encryption code and a decryption code works in software development, right? I don't want to get too far out here in building this library and sharing it with others by virtue of what we hold in our library, what we have access to is information that we share with others, right? Because it's so vast, you can't put a number on that much data. And so sometimes when we use the language of letters, fire letters, and numbers as they're associated with each other geometrically and mathematically, which is the spiritual flow of consciousness and how we experience what we are in our mirror, right? But I noticed that you use the word Khunderay, Khunderay, Ray, like Ra, Y, X and Y chromosomes, silver and gold, silver seed council, right? The first atom seed, the first cell. I mean, when I was a child, it was so basic that I really did have to put duct tape over my mouth because of how I realized it's a game, but we don't play games. We've moved beyond playing games because they're unnecessary. That's what I used to say to myself when I was a child, Khunderay, Joy Khunderay. Because that's the ping. I call it ping pong, because I grew up with ping pong tables, tennis tables, games called Chutes and Ladders, Monopoly, and which is what competing against each other. So that's one unit of consciousness. It represents electrified sound, the force field, right? May the force be with you, Skywalker. The force, electricity, electrons, protons, neutrons. So you have, just like in a football game, you have one force, they're all male, right, on one side of the ball, right, separated by a line, right, a line of communication, a geometric line. So you can see how the football field is geometrically formed, right, to play on a flat field where you have force against force. One side is competing using its energy to beat up the other side. That's consciousness that's synchronized to itself, carrying out what's called an executive function, which is a cognitive function, which is the function of its consciousness that is all communicating with each other as they've been trained and programmed to carry out a task modality by the position, which is the player, which is play one, record two. So they're playing a movie. Actors on a stage. What action? Remember, lights, action, camera, act, ion. The ions. Now we're back to the negative and polarity ions. Eye on you, the camera, eye on you. Right? The first camera. The first photographer, the first photo, pH, right? So you see how that works with having the entire electromagnetic spectrum available in consciousness because you're a monad. Now, with me, as I've described before, because of the language of frequency and vibration, the founder's language, the first language, the language of DNA, right? Of electrified sound and light, tones, and the importance of experiencing atoms, spheres that are in balance, perfect balance. So when all the atoms are in perfect balance, communicating with each other, and are all in perfect balance, then those 12 spheres are in perfect balance. So the consciousness, which is the soul's energy, is in perfect balance with Adam, the first atom cell, the first Christic spiral. And so that's basic logic, which is logos, log OS, operating system, log scale water distribution tables, so we know how water works with sound. We're mostly water, right? So we're a sound system, right? A stereo receiver and transmitter using neurons, right? Yeah, neurons. So I knew, obviously, before I came in here, through my heart and my soul, when that activate the shield, 4 years of age, activate that shield, girl, right? So you know that the language, as Tesla would say, vibration and frequency. Frequency is the code, which is numerically designated 177.565. Key the mic. Now I can listen. Now I can hear the sound. The sound and light of the communicator who has another mic open. Remember, key the mic. Speak into the phone. Speaker phones. Right? Speak. So you realize you have a dial on your radio set, right? And if you're going to communicate using your antenna to another antenna, then they need to be able to translate the mathematical and geometrical frequencies and the codes that you're running based on the core of who you are, which is your soul core, soul, like in solar arcing energy, right? That is experiencing itself, communicating itself to other cells, other antennas. So in all the atoms, which are represented by the antennas, are all communicating to each other at every level of energetic synthesis, if you will, which means we're all synchronized. All the atoms are synchronized to experience perfect balance. That means that everything that's got an atom has a cell, a living cell, experiencing real light, which is real love, which is true love, because it doesn't require a charge to experience the law of least effort, to experience being absolute love, to experience the EFFI field. So when I saw that, and I realized because of the stuff that I've put in your window over time, I have no idea what you do with your consciousness, your soul, and the essence of your spirit, whether you take the time to watch that, because then you're going to map read the communication by virtue of the frequencies and the codes and the encryption keys that are represented by that information that you're mapped and you're thus reading, right? So now when you're using the Khunderay, right, it means that you have been able to map read with your soul and spirit the information that is represented by the guardian materials. Okay? That means having such done that, you would most likely not have used and changed that word Khunderay. Under, like thunder. And so that was beautiful for me to experience that this morning, because you realize when it comes to bioregenesis, salvage contracts, redemption contracts, and all that, and a lot of the information that came out of the guardian materials when it was released into the morphogenetic field structure by virtue of what Arshaya and her husband and other speakers, those two were not the only ones. They're not up anymore, and I pretty much know why. But there were known as the Dance for Freedom programs. It was the Emerald Covenant channel, and they had a gazillion videos up there that covered the whole gamut. Okay, but I wanted to share with you because of how language of communication works. Like I've mentioned before, when I was a child, I allowed myself to be programmed to speak the English language. So I played with it a lot. I've talked a lot about programming, what we choose to allow ourselves to run as a program interface in an APIN grid network, right? Network, we're all networked, a net, right? And how frequency nets work, just like the simple way that I transfer it is by similar experiences that others have of what they're holding in memory, by what they've experienced that is held in that memory. Given the time period in which we're now operating becomes important, because if this was a gazillion years ago, we might use a different language of what's held in your cellular memory, because you can translate that mathematically and geometrically of being able to transcribe, or if you will, because you're going to record what it is that's recorded that I'm thus experiencing and thus communicating to you, how that works. At the end of the day, what it means to experience perfect balance. And knowing the difference between one and the other, or if you will, knowing the difference between something that is artificially generated or created out of dead light energy versus manifesting what is real, which is being manifested out of eternal love, which is eternal love creation spheres. And that's when you get into the torque speed differential between density and time, which is the atomic speed, the speed at which those atoms. And now your consciousness, which is running those waves, are those waves of communication, which represent those lines of communication, right? The angles of light, the angels of light, okay? With creation spheres, how the math and the geometry work to experience the perfect geometric and mathematical flow of creation mechanics. So that all the atoms that are experiencing being atoms, and what we're all experiencing being souls in spirit with our essence, we all know who we all are in truth, which means there's no masking technology, because we can map, read, and experience the true identity of the operator of that software that's not trying to fake it. So I did a number of videos about fake light, real light, what an illusion is, you know, and all the rest of it, right? I realize that I move. If you go back and look at every single one of my videos, that would obviously take a whole lot of time, but you can see, and I mentioned this before, when you have a job to do, we operate at a the highest rate of speed that you can, which means we're with the one. We operate on behalf of the one. So we're always with the one. And that's what allows us to be able to operate on behalf of the one, which means your soul arcing spiritual essence is represented by the one, which is the true EFFI field. Okay? So, for example, when